10 years ago, the Houthis took the Yemeni capital Sana'a in what marked the start of a devastating war. Originally a ragtag militia from the mountainous north, they are now holding power over more than half of the country, while the internationally recognized government is watching on from Riyadh. This is not just a civil war, it's a battle between rival camps in the Middle East, led by Iran on the one hand and Saudi Arabia on the other.
The Saudi messaging was, this is an easy fight, it would be over quick. And it all ended up getting quite intractable and much more complex.
The Houthis receive training from Iran, they do receive arms and money as part of a broader network called the Resistance. The Resistance being Iran's network of allies and proxies.
The fear of Iran has always been there. The UAE and Saudi are official allies. Helping Saudi Arabia is kind of expected from Gulf countries.
You would see Houthi projectiles being blown up over Saudi skies. The very urban areas that Saudi Arabia would like to develop with foreign funding. It's not a good look for the image that the kingdom is trying to project.
The ongoing conflict creates this huge power vacuum there, pretty ideal for jihadist groups to expand.
This is a multi-layered conflict full of twists and turns and with no end in sight. In this episode, we'll try to understand where the warring parties stand 10 years on, and is there a way out of the stalemate? I'm Krassi Twig, and this is the Global Jigsaw from BBC Monitoring, where we look at the world through the lens of its media, getting past the narratives, the propaganda and the disinformation.
Radio Tehran. Мы не вторгались на территорию Украины.
Western countries are not the international community. That era has finished.
조중 두당 두 나라 최고 영도자 동지들께서는
This is a jigsaw with many interlocking pieces we'll be putting together. But don't be put off. Before we go granular, here's a quick recap of the basics by Duncan Stanworth.
Yemen has been in a state of political crisis since 2011, when a wave of protests, inspired by the Arab Spring uprisings, forced President Ali Abdallah Saleh to resign. In the turmoil that followed, the Houthis, a militia supported by Iran, seized much of the north and west of the country, while Saudi-led forces, backed by American weapons, intervened to support the internationally recognized government based initially in Aden in the south. In 2019, Aden was seized by the separatist Southern Transitional Council, which is supported by the United Arab Emirates. This is why the internationally recognized government is now based in Saudi Arabia. The multi-sided fighting has also seen activity by Al-Qaeda and Islamic State jihadist groups.
The Houthis are often described in the news as a proxy of Tehran, but their relationship is far more nuanced. Bari Sadid from our Iran team has a helpful definition of a proxy, or a frontman, if you prefer.
So I'd say the Houthis are not really a proxy. By proxy, we imply a subordinate power that has a level of dependence that would be pliable to the demands of their state sponsor. But the Houthis aren't like the other non-state actors backed by Iran in Iraq and Syria. The Houthis aren't, for example, dependent on Iran financially, politically, or ideologically. They have their own local power base, they have their own local streams of income, and a distinct ideology, even if related to that of Iran.
The Houthis may be part of what Iran likes to call the axis of resistance, but they are distinct from other groups backed by Tehran. They're a loose proxy with their own agenda.
They have their own distinct domestic goals. For example, Iranian financial aid to the Houthis is a fraction compared to what Hezbollah receives in Lebanon. And it's worth remembering amid all this that the Houthis are in control of the majority of Yemen's population as well. They're effectively a state in all but name. They want to represent Yemen, and that's where they have acted counter in the past to Iranian advice. In negotiations, for example, like Houthi negotiations with the Saudis, there isn't much Iranian involvement, directly or indirectly.
So Iran does have some influence on the Houthis. Does it mean it can rein them in?
This has been a consistent line from the US, to the point where we had President Biden saying that he sent a private message to Tehran urging them to stop the Houthis' shipping attacks. The first question to ask is, how likely is Iran to try? I think not very, in terms of a basic cost-benefit analysis. There's little in it for Iran, unless they feared a direct blowback from the Houthis' operations. And there are costs associated with being seen to stopping the Houthis' self-declared solidarity with Gaza. And then the second question is, would it work if Iran tried? And again, it doesn't seem likely. Historically speaking, the Houthis have acted against Iranian advice, both domestically and when it comes to their regional relations with Saudi.
The declared aim of Iran's network of proxies and allies is the destruction of Israel and the removal of US troops from the Middle East. As we've discussed in our previous episodes on the subject, there is an element of plausible deniability in Tehran's relationship with the Houthis. Nevertheless, this alliance is an important one for Iran, especially as its conflict with Israel deepens.
It seems that the Houthis are too valuable of an ally for Tehran in terms of targeting Iran's regional rivals and enemies at little cost for Iran to make aid for them conditional. And at the core of all this, lest we forget, is the Gaza war, which is why the shipping attacks will continue to give the Houthis domestic and regional legitimacy, as long as they are seen to be acting against Israel in solidarity with the Palestinians. As long as that factor remains, meaningful de-escalation is unlikely.
Iran is said to be arming the Houthis, or at least partially. Where do the missiles and the drones come from?
Absolutely. Iran and the resistance network, more broadly, does help the Houthis in terms of military training, arms blueprints, and funds. Historically, it's been the IRGC, the Islamic Revolution Guard Corps, the connective tissue between these different members of the resistance. When we're talking about the Quds Force, the body in charge of the IRGC's external affairs, so to speak. Recently, we've seen Hezbollah in Lebanon taking on a similar role within Yemen itself. Both of these groups have something of almost an advisory role with the Houthis in Yemen, to the point where we've seen both Hezbollah and IRGC members being killed in Yemen.
As is often the case with our work, we connect dots and read between the lines, especially when the narrative is carefully curated, which is the case with state media in Iran.
Iran absolutely denies shipping arms to the Houthis. What Iran wants is a screen to exist between the Houthis and Iran to avoid any kind of blowback from Western countries. And in terms of official commentary from the government and the media, what we see is a lot of rhetorical support for the Houthis shipping attacks. But what you won't see is any kind of direct admission that Iran is arming or aiding the Houthis.
But the US has intercepted weapons shipments from Iran to the Houthis.
Iran absolutely denies the existence of these weapons exports to the Houthis. And what Iranian officials have said in the past is that this is a way of diminishing the Houthis' own domestic capacity for weapons production, which in its own way might be hinting at the weapons production capacity that Iran has actually helped the Houthis build up, in terms of the Houthis being able to construct some of their own parts for drones and even missiles.
The US, the UK, and 12 other countries launched an operation to protect the Red Sea shipping lanes from Houthi attacks.
Security, security, security. This is Coalition Warship Listening Channel 1.
Last year, Washington said it transferred more than 1 million rounds for Soviet-era machine guns to Ukraine's armed forces that was seized as part of an Iranian shipment to Yemen. Let's poke around in the Houthi stockpile. It seems wide-ranging and plentiful.
The Houthis have in their possession actually a considerable historical stockpile of older Soviet missiles, for example, more modern Chinese arms. And these are stockpiles that the Houthis have either seized or inherited from the previous iterations of the Yemeni government. In terms of the majority of the Houthi missiles and drones being used now, they're strikingly similar to the arms that Iran has, to the point where multiple security experts have concluded that these are in fact reproductions, rebrandings of Iranian drones and missiles. But it's also worth mentioning that the Houthis have been seeking to diversify their weapons imports. We have reports that they're seeking to secure weapons imports from Russia and from China as well.
You are listening to the Global Jigsaw from BBC Monitoring. So much about the Houthis and Iran's resistance network. The other camp in this war is an equally complex alliance led by Iran's arch-rival, Saudi Arabia. Amira Fatala is our top expert on the country. She's been following the ins and outs of this war over the last 10 years. And Riyadh has been involved in the conflicts of its southern neighbour for much longer than that.
Since the early 2000s, the Yemeni government fought 6 wars against the Houthi rebels. And Saudi Arabia was very much seen as being involved on the side of the government. The person in charge was the ex-president of Yemen, Ali Abdullah Saleh, came to be deposed from power through popular uprisings known as the Arab Spring under a power transfer deal, which was brokered by Saudi Arabia, signed in Saudi Arabia. And interestingly, after that, Ali Abdullah Saleh would go on to very briefly become an ally of the Houthis to fight the then Yemeni government before that alliance completely shattered and resulted in his assassination at the hands of the Houthis. But you can see how there is that Saudi-Yemeni interplay at several junctures.
2015 brings the Saudis onto the scene in a big way. The Houthis had seized the capital Sana'a, pushed the government into a coastal corner, and extended control over a major part of Yemen. For Riyadh, that was an unacceptable situation.
Saudi Arabia formed this military coalition to support the legitimate government of Yemen. And of course, for public purposes, that is the main message. With the Houthis, there is another consideration, which is that they are a huge ally of Iran, Saudi Arabia's traditional foe. Despite on and off deals between Saudi and Iran, that rivalry has remained quite persistent throughout the decades for influence in the region. Of course, there is the immediate pressing need to do something about the fact that your ally on your southern border has just been kicked out of the capital and pushed aside. And now here is a rebel group launching this insurgency and taking over state institutions and set themselves up as an unofficial government.
What united the countries in Riyadh's coalition was their aversion to Iran's influence in the region. But as you'll see, this coalition hasn't always acted like a coherent entity.
There's a number of countries in the coalition ranging from traditional allies like the United Arab Emirates, at least nominally, one of Saudi Arabia's wealthy Gulf neighbors. Also less wealthy allies like Sudan, Egypt as well. And Qatar, of course, joined the alliance at the beginning in 2015, but dropped out in 2017 because of a major spat, this rift that erupted in the Gulf between Qatar on one side and Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain and Egypt on the other. That was over largely ideological differences and allegiances. And Qatar has always been seen as being more open to Iran.
Ideology is the glue that holds this alliance together. But each member has its own strategic interests in Yemen, and sometimes they collide.
For Saudi Arabia and the UAE, the matter of having influence in Yemen is very important. Having the Houthis essentially sidelined, but also resources. And we came to see a Saudi-UAE rivalry over strategic areas of Yemen, different parts of the country where these are two countries eventually ended up being quite at odds on many occasions, not least with the UAE supporting Yemeni separatists, which were fighting the government, which were supposed to be backed by this very coalition.
So the two main allies, Riyadh and Abu Dhabi, came to support opposite factions in the war. This is a big deal and we'll come back to it. But first, let's bring in the most important figure in the Saudi involvement in Yemen, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, better known as MBS.
In 2015, Mohammed bin Salman was appointed defense minister. This was his first real government role.
الأمير محمد بن سلمان وليا للعهد في السعودية.
This is before he went on to become the crown prince, appointed by his father, King Salman, who upended traditions and norms in the Saudi royal succession. And within 2 months of his appointment, he essentially oversees the start of the war in Yemen. Now, when he first came to power, there was a lot of conversation about how this was a person who took very bold moves. Some felt maybe uncalculated or rash decisions, which is at odds with traditional Saudi foreign policy, which is very well considered and usually quite cautious. There were also concerns at the time because Yemen had been seen as somewhat of a quagmire. And so for the Saudis to get involved, some felt that this wasn't going to be easy. But the sense very much from the official Saudi messaging was, this is an easy fight. It would be over quick. A month into the war, it was renamed Operation Restoring Hope. So quite a positive message for what was effectively a bombing campaign. It all ended up getting quite difficult and much more complex. In addition, enormous humanitarian toll, which the UN has described as one of the world's worst.
The UN stopped the Yemen body count in 2021, when it confirmed that over 150,000 people had been killed since the start of the war, and more than 200,000 had died of hunger and untreated diseases. Now more than 23 million people, and that's 3/4 of the population, are in need of aid.
In the meantime, MBS was shifting much more towards more practical, considered steps and really projecting an image to the rest of the world that Saudi Arabia is a leader in change, in development, in economy, in entertainment, in sport, and above all, really a lucrative place to invest, especially in these huge projects like the NEOM megacity.
NEOM, Saudi Arabia's grand plan to transform the country and its image. A project almost the size of Belgium.
And all of this contrasts very sharply with being engaged in a war that seemingly will not end in Yemen and that isn't really going particularly well for the Saudi-led coalition.
There's a stalemate now. What's the new Saudi strategy in Yemen?
Certainly there is a softer approach in terms of the rhetoric. Of course, military action has more or less stopped. So we've tracked Saudi media over many years, and Saudi media would take such a harsh, scathing tone towards the Houthis. They called them terrorists, they called them militias, and they said that they are destroying Yemen. The Saudi media have softened their tone towards the Houthis now in that they refer to them, for the most part, as the Houthis. And that's a big step down from what we used to see. They also didn't really seize upon the Houthis' recent maritime attacks in the way that they would have in the past. They would have picked up on anything the Houthis do and, really kind of blast them for it in all their media. That's not really happening. The reporting is more detached, descriptive. Now, this coincided with Saudi Arabia hosting the Houthis for peace talks in the Saudi capital, Riyadh. And it was unprecedented that they engaged with them directly and inside Saudi Arabia. It also slightly cut out the Yemeni government.
The change of tone reflects something important that's happening in Saudi Arabia. As Amira said, MBS has boundless ambitions as part of his Vision 2030 project to transform the country's economy. A devastating war next door doesn't sit well with those grand designs.
The really pressing thing for Saudi Arabia, stop those near daily attacks that the Houthis used to launch at the southern Saudi border and which targeted the airports in the capital Riyadh, in the second city Jeddah. These are the very urban areas that Saudi Arabia would like to develop with foreign funding. It's not a good look for the image that the kingdom is trying to project to the world.
And as you said, the Saudis hosting the Houthis in these unprecedented talks, it does sound like a step towards recognition, doesn't it?
There's a very delicate balance that needs to be struck at all times in Saudi foreign policy. And that goes as well for their deal to rebuild relations with Iran. There's a limit to how much they will engage, and there's careful wording around the meetings that they will hold, and nothing is a given. The Saudi messaging is very much that the emphasis is to find peace and to fulfill the ambitions of the Yemeni people. The next steps are never a given. The port city of Hodeidah is still controlled by the Houthis, and that is influencing, of course, the flow of goods into Yemen, not just because effectively there is an armed group controlling the port, but also because the Saudis will place conditions on what they will allow to pass through territorial waters to reach that port. So these are all those areas where it's deadlocked. It just freezes the conflict. So none of the infrastructure is really being rebuilt. There's still wildly insufficient goods going into the country, and the suffering is still continuing on an enormous scale.
And now to the other key ally in Riyadh's coalition that, not surprisingly, has its own agenda in Yemen. Amira mentioned UAE boots on the ground. To explain all that, here comes Nesreen Kamal, who follows Abu Dhabi's media from Cairo.
The United Arab Emirates is a powerful Gulf state, and it's a leading member of the Saudi-led coalition. The UAE and Saudi are official allies. Helping Saudi Arabia is kind of expected from Gulf countries. Gulf countries in general are concerned about the influence of Iran on the region. The fear of Iran has always been there.
Fear of Iran may always be present, but for the UAE, this is very much a balancing act. While it's trying to stay on the right side of the sectarian divide, it has also adopted a flexible approach in its pursuit of opportunities.
Abu Dhabi and Tehran may stand on opposite sides regarding some regional issues, as they back rival sides in the war in Yemen, and they are also at obvious odds when it comes to relations with the US and Israel, but they do tend to focus on the trade partnerships. And of course, we have seen tension between the two countries over the long-standing dispute over the three islands of Abu Musa and Lesser Tomb and Greater Tomb, because Abu Dhabi considers these islands are as occupied by Iran, which are located in the strategic Strait of Hormuz.
طنب الكبرى، طنب الصغرى وأبو موسى بعدما شهدت علاقات أبو ظبي مع طهران تطوراً.
Other strategic interests that the UAE has in Yemen.
The UAE joining Saudi-led coalition, and then in 2019 it announced that it was withdrawing most of its troops from Yemen.
لأسباب استراتيجية وتكتيكية هكذا عزا مسؤول إماراتي سحب أبو ظبي قوات لها في اليمن.
And then after that, reports started emerging about presence of UAE in strategic locations in Yemen, for example, like Shabwa province, which is rich in oil and natural gas. And there is also Socotra Islands. Socotra is located close to the Bab el-Mandab Strait, and the strait, of course, links the Red Sea to the Indian Ocean, which is a key route for vital energy shipments in the region. And Socotra is also a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
The images of those trees are incredible. They look amazing. They look like giant mushrooms. They're just brilliant.
They look absolutely amazing. They look like they're coming out of another world. And they're usually astonishing because you wouldn't expect to have such wonderful location that could be different from all the desert that you see in the Gulf area.
The UAE's approach towards Yemen fits in with its appetite for a higher global profile. Over the last 10 years, it has become a big investor in Africa.
It has a very ambitious foreign policy that includes pursuing economic interests and working to expand their regional influence. So the UAE could be aiming to protect its maritime interests in areas like the Red Sea and the Western Indian Ocean. And their presence in Yemen could also be interpreted in the same vision.
I came across one line in our research that says some people are collecting stamps, the UAE is collecting ports.
Yes, this is actually a repeated line. This emerges in the media every now and then. And people are always connecting the presence of the UAE in Yemen and in Africa, and they're relating this presence to the economic ambitions that the country is having.
In 2019, the UAE announced that it was scaling down the number of its boots on the ground, as Nesreen said, limiting its military presence to areas of strategic interest. Yet it still backs tens of thousands of armed men in Yemen, and it has other ways of spreading its influence.
Parallel to its military strategy, it has also employed a very effective soft power approach. It was going through different aid channels, especially the Emirates Red Crescent. The kind of aid that the UAE was providing in Yemen was different from the regular food distribution and the humanitarian aid that was being distributed by other Gulf countries.
صاحب السمو الشيخ محمد بن زايد آل نهيان في الوقوف إلى جانب كل اليمنيين.
They have focused on more strategic projects, on infrastructure, education, healthcare. They also carried out projects renovating schools and sometimes providing oxygen cylinders to hospitals.
We haven't yet mentioned another important actor in this war, one which, as we'll find out, has put the main allies in the coalition, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, at loggerheads.
The Southern Transitional Council, or what we refer to as STC, is a separatist movement. It was established back in 2017, aiming to gain complete independence for the southern parts of the country. And then in 2019, it took control of the port city of Aden, which of course was the temporary capital for the Yemen's internationally recognized government. And the STC claims to be against Al-Islah Party, which is affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood. And the UAE is, again, it considers the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. The STC is standing against Al-Islah Party. A lot of the Yemeni government are members of the party.
So to recap, the internationally recognized government, supported by Riyadh's coalition, was facing a new challenger, the STC, which is supported by Abu Dhabi, a member of that same coalition. So that's a rift within the alliance itself, something that UAE media has been curiously quiet about.
We have not seen media reports that openly discuss any rifts between the two countries. Although there have been international reports on a possible conflict of interest in Yemen. In March 2023, there was a report by the Wall Street Journal that suggested that although they are formal allies, Riyadh and Abu Dhabi are increasingly rifting apart due to their growing competition over power and over markets.
So how does the UAE media cover the situation in Yemen if the rift is not part of it?
UAE media is more focused on highlighting the humanitarian efforts that it is exerting in Yemen. And of course, overall, it's not openly critical of Saudi Arabia. Traditional media in the UAE has sparingly reported on its military involvement and the tactics that it's been using in the south of Yemen. And we can also see abundant reporting on the aid missions taking a topmost position occupied by the UAE in terms of the volume of the aid granted to Yemen.
The more we dig into these complexities, the more we realize that things are not what they seem. The proxies aren't real proxies. The alliances are fractured, the rivalries fluid. The UAE's relationship with Iran is a case in point.
We can see a greater shift in UAE's foreign policy because it has put more emphasis on dialogue and diplomacy as an attempt to safeguard its national security. And this was actually reflected in a rare visit by the UAE National Security Advisor to Tehran in December 2021. Despite all the differences, we can see that the two countries have managed to maintain a quite stable relationship despite the differences they have. The UAE has later showed signs of mending relations with Iran. I think this happened when it reinstated its ambassador to Iran after nearly 7 years of the severed ties between the two countries.
If the situation wasn't complex enough, it gets even more muddled by the presence of militant extremist groups seeking to exploit the chaos of the war. Jihadists discovered Yemen decades ago. Alex Wright is one of our jihadism experts watching the region.
The roots of jihadism in Yemen go back to the 1990s. The country became kind of a haven for jihadists returning from the Afghan jihad against the Soviets. The country had a weak central government, and this created space for jihadist networks, particularly Al-Qaeda, to grow there. Yemen really got put on the map in the year 2000 when Al-Qaeda claimed the bombing of the USS Cole, a U.S. warship that was in Aden at the time.
An explosion claimed the lives of at least 4 sailors on one of our naval vessels, the USS Cole, this morning.
Fast forward to 2009, that's when Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, better known as AQAP, was formed. It came out of a merger between the local and Saudi branches of Al-Qaeda and quickly became one of the most dangerous branches of the group around the world. Then, of course, there was the Arab Spring and the Civil War, which weakened the state even more. And AQAP took full advantage of this, expanding its influence and even taking over some territory in the south for a bit of time. At one point, AQAP even held the port city of Al-Mukalla for around a year. Then, of course, in 2014, we saw IS pop up in Yemen. The two groups, AQAP and IS, became bitter rivals, although IS Yemen has been dormant in the country now for around 2 years.
How important is Yemen for them? What attracted them to Yemen?
Yemen is incredibly important for jihadist groups, and it really comes down to the situation on the ground in the country. Ongoing conflict creates this huge power vacuum there, which makes it pretty ideal for these jihadist groups to expand. When you've got a country that's in chaos, where the government is fragmented, it becomes fertile ground for these groups to recruit new people to join them. Both AQAP and IS frame their fight in Yemen as part of the war against the Houthis, who are Shia and backed by Iran. They see themselves as defending Yemen's Sunnis from an encroaching Shia threat. This helps them rally support, even though they're fighting other Sunni groups like each other at the same time.
Can you tell me what have they achieved in this fight against the Houthis?
Both these groups were fighting each other in the province of Al-Baida, while at the same time the Houthis were fighting them. What happened at the end is both these groups got beaten back by their infighting as well as the offensive from the Houthis, and at the current time they're both in a very sort of weakened state because of this. The main group that's active is AQAP. They're not as strong as they used to be. Over the years, AQAP's leadership has taken some serious hits from US drone strikes. You've got major figures like Anwar al-Awlaki, who was a US-born propagandist who was killed in 2011, and you have their former leader Qasim al-Raimi, who was taken out in 2022. Strikes like these really weaken the group. At their peak around 2016, they controlled some territory in southern Yemen. But now they've been pushed back to remote mountainous areas at the current time, mainly in Abyan and Shabwa provinces. They're still battling forces like the UAE-backed Southern Transitional Council, the STC. Now you have IS in Yemen. They've completely faded away from the scene at the current moment.
It seems to me this rivalry really isn't helping these groups. I mean, isn't that something they realize? After all, who is the bigger enemy, the Houthis or the jihadist rivals?
IS and Al-Qaeda hate each other everywhere. While they're both Sunni groups and they share a common enemy in the Houthis, they're still at each other's throats all the time. It's kind of like watching two sports teams battle over the same turf. What makes it interesting is that AQAP tends to approach things with a more long-term strategy. They build alliances with locals. They even govern territories when they have the ability to do so. For example, when they had control of Mukalla for about a year, they provided basic services for residents. They gave them electricity, water, etc.
BBC Monitoring's jihadist media team or JMT as we call it, is observing the media operations of different jihadist groups and their commentary on social media in quite a few languages. This gives us unparalleled insight into their thinking.
Another really interesting thing with this rivalry is how it's unfolded not just on the battlefield, but also in an intense propaganda war. One of the standout moments was when AQAP released this video making fun of IS fighters. It showed these outtakes from an IS video where militants, they were messing up on their lines. They were sort of blooper reel. It made IS look like a bunch of amateurs, and it was clearly designed to undermine them. Then you have IS firing back at AQAP, accusing them of being in cahoots with the Yemeni government, which in jihadist circles is a very serious accusation because they're backed by the US.
The Gaza war became a turning point for the Houthis. They grabbed international limelight with their maritime attacks in the Red Sea, causing disruption to global trade, as they say, in support of the Palestinians. Here's Amira again.
For the Houthis, it was a bit of a PR coup because they fairly quickly into the Gaza war began attacking anything that they would describe as Israeli interests. That included ships that were passing through Yemeni waters and then spun very cleverly throughout their social media to project themselves as the only people in the Middle East who are doing anything to support the Palestinians. That's their words. And this message was actually quite effective. You could see that people were supportive of the Houthi actions. But that also means a lot of attention, not just in the Middle East, but in the rest of the world, was turned towards the Houthis as an Israeli enemy or a group attacking international shipping, and less so as a group that is involved in the war in Yemen and actually involved in targeting civilians as well. And some of those violations are still happening. Now we have the Houthis as heroes. It's an Iranian ally that has some measure of independence from Tehran. Bit of a wild card in what they could do. So the pedestal that they are on now, whether positive or just in terms of media focus in the world, it really could go either way for them.
Back to Barry Sadid for his final thought.
What is worth remembering is that the Houthis have already withstood a decade-long Saudi campaign by ground and air targeting its arms stocks and military capabilities. There will actually be no final blow to the Houthis militarily, and the Houthis seem to have actually grown stronger and boosted their own capabilities in the course of the war, that they won't stop according to any kind of regional or international pressure. And what we can say is the now year-long war in Gaza has fundamentally rearranged regional politics and the Houthis' place within that politics.
The losers are always civilians, people caught in the middle, and people who are suffering for multiple reasons, who've come out of 10 years of war, basically constant bombardment by the coalition, fighting by the Houthis, sniper attacks, mortar attacks, you name it. And now no opportunity to rebuild because the conflict is just locked in with those same rivalries and divisions now on the ground, hampering any kind of progress, any kind of rebuilding on the rubble of 10 years of war.
Thank you to Amira Fathallah, Barry Sadid, Nesreen Kamal and Alex Wright. This episode was produced by Krista Shatori, Elchin Suleimanov and me, Gracie Twig. The sound engineer is John Hemingway and our editor is Judy King.